Question 1. Governance review demonstrates that a Chula Vista Police Department officer, after a lawful arrest and seizure of items believed to be contraband, failed to immediately log and secure the seized items in the department's designated evidence locker, instead leaving them temporarily in an unsecured patrol vehicle compartment while attending to other urgent duties. Considering the regulatory framework governing law enforcement in California, which of the following actions best upholds the integrity of the investigation and the admissibility of the evidence? Option A. Rely on a verbal confirmation from a fellow officer who witnessed the items being placed in the vehicle, assuming the chain of custody remains intact due to this informal witness. Option B. Immediately retrieve the seized items, log them into the department's official evidence management system with a detailed notation of the delay and the reason, and secure them in the designated evidence locker, ensuring all chain of custody documentation is completed accurately. Option C. Delegate the logging and securing of the items to a civilian administrative assistant who was present at the station, without direct officer supervision or formal transfer of custody documentation. Option D. Process the items as quickly as possible later in the shift, prioritizing other tasks and assuming the temporary unsecured storage in the patrol vehicle did not compromise the evidence's integrity. The correct answer is B. Immediately retrieve the seized items, log them into the department's official evidence management system with a detailed notation of the delay and the reason, and secure them in the designated evidence locker, ensuring all chain of custody documentation is completed accurately. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between departmental efficiency and the strict adherence to legal procedures and individual rights. Officers are tasked with maintaining public safety and order, which can sometimes create pressure to expedite investigations. However, the Chula Vista Police Department, like all law enforcement agencies in California, operates under the California Penal Code and the U.S. Constitution, which mandates specific protocols for evidence handling and individual liberties. Failure to follow these protocols can lead to the suppression of evidence, civil liability for the department, and erosion of public trust. Therefore, careful judgment is required to balance operational needs with legal and ethical obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting the chain of custody for all seized evidence, including the initial collection, transfer, storage, and eventual disposition. This meticulous documentation ensures that the integrity of the evidence is maintained and that it can be presented in court without challenge. Specifically, officers must adhere to Chula Vista Police Department's General Order 500 series regarding property and evidence. This order, consistent with California Penal Code sections related to evidence preservation and admissibility, requires officers to log all evidence, secure it properly, and maintain a clear, unbroken record of who handled the evidence and when. This approach is correct because it directly supports the legal admissibility of evidence, upholds the constitutional rights of individuals by preventing tampering or unauthorized access, and demonstrates the department's commitment to lawful investigative practices. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying on informal verbal agreements or assumptions about evidence handling among officers. This fails to meet the stringent documentation requirements of Chula Vista PD's General Order 500 series and California law. Such an approach creates significant gaps in the chain of custody, making the evidence vulnerable to challenges regarding its authenticity and integrity in court. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize the speed of evidence processing over proper documentation, such as leaving evidence unsecured or unlogged temporarily to expedite other tasks. This violates departmental policy and state regulations designed to prevent loss, contamination, or tampering, thereby jeopardizing the investigation and potentially violating an individual's due process rights. A third incorrect approach is to delegate evidence handling to personnel not officially designated or trained in evidence management protocols, without proper oversight and documentation. This circumvents established procedures and can lead to errors in logging, storage, or transfer, compromising the evidence's legal standing and the department's accountability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established policies and legal mandates. This involves understanding the specific requirements of departmental general orders, such as the Chula Vista Police Department's General Order 500 series, and relevant state laws, like the California Penal Code sections governing evidence. When faced with situations that might tempt shortcuts, officers should ask, does this action comply with all departmental policies and legal statutes regarding evidence handling? If the answer is uncertain, the default should be to follow the most stringent procedural requirement. This proactive approach ensures that investigations are conducted lawfully, evidence is admissible, and the department maintains its integrity and accountability. Question 2. During the evaluation of a traffic stop in Chula Vista, California, an officer observes an individual exhibiting nervous behavior and a strong odor of marijuana emanating from the vehicle. The officer has a reasonable suspicion that the driver may be in possession of illegal substances. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take regarding a search of the vehicle? Option A. Politely inform the driver of the observed indicators and ask for their voluntary consent to search the vehicle, clearly stating that they have the right to refuse. Option B. Proceed with a search of the vehicle, implying that refusal would be viewed unfavorably and could lead to further scrutiny. Option C. Detain the driver for an extended period to further investigate their potential involvement in criminal activity before deciding on a search. Option D. Immediately conduct a search of the vehicle based on the reasonable suspicion of illegal substances and the odor of marijuana. The correct answer is A. Politely inform the driver of the observed indicators and ask for their voluntary consent to search the vehicle, clearly stating that they have the right to refuse. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the strict legal boundaries governing searches and seizures. The officer must act decisively, but also adhere to the California Penal Code and established case law regarding probable cause and consent. Misinterpreting the situation or acting impulsively could lead to the suppression of crucial evidence, jeopardizing the investigation, and potentially allowing a suspect to evade justice. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any actions taken are legally sound and ethically defensible. The correct approach involves obtaining voluntary and informed consent from the individual before conducting a search of their vehicle. This means clearly informing the individual of their right to refuse the search and ensuring that their agreement is given freely, without coercion or duress. This aligns with the principles of the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as interpreted by California courts, which protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures. Specifically, consent must be voluntary, and the person giving consent must have the authority to do so. By clearly stating the purpose of the request and the right to refuse, the officer respects the individual's autonomy and ensures the search is conducted within legal parameters, making any evidence obtained admissible. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with a search based solely on the officer's suspicion that the individual might be involved in criminal activity, without any articulable facts establishing probable cause or obtaining valid consent. This violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches. Another incorrect approach would be to imply or state that the search is mandatory or that refusal will lead to negative consequences, thereby coercing consent. This renders the consent involuntary and legally invalid. Finally, searching the vehicle without any legal justification, such as probable cause, a warrant, or valid consent, constitutes an illegal search and seizure, and any evidence found would be inadmissible under the exclusionary rule. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves first assessing the situation to determine if probable cause exists for a search warrant or if exigent circumstances justify an immediate search. If neither is present, the officer should consider requesting consent. When requesting consent, it is crucial to clearly articulate the reason for the request and explicitly inform the individual of their right to refuse. If consent is granted, the scope of the search should be limited to what was agreed upon. Throughout the process, officers must remain aware of their legal obligations and the rights of the individuals they encounter, ensuring all actions are justifiable and documented. Question 3. What factors determine the permissible scope and duration of a traffic stop initiated by a Chula Vista Police Department officer in California? Option A. The officer's personal belief that the individual might be involved in something illegal. Option B. The desire to gather general intelligence on individuals in the community. Option C. The presence of specific, articulable facts that create reasonable suspicion of criminal activity beyond the initial reason for the stop. Option D. The driver's perceived nervousness or reluctance to answer questions unrelated to the traffic violation. The correct answer is C. The presence of specific, articulable facts that create reasonable suspicion of criminal activity beyond the initial reason for the stop. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the legal rights of an individual during a traffic stop. The officer must act swiftly, but also adhere strictly to the California Vehicle Code and constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. Misinterpreting the scope of permissible inquiry or action can lead to evidence being suppressed, departmental discipline, or civil liability. The officer's judgment must be grounded in established legal precedent and departmental policy regarding traffic stops. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer first establishing reasonable suspicion that a crime has occurred, is occurring, or is about to occur based on specific, articulable facts. This reasonable suspicion must be related to the initial reason for the stop or a new, distinct criminal activity observed. If reasonable suspicion exists, the officer may then expand the scope of the stop to investigate the new suspected criminal activity. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, as interpreted by California law and relevant case law. The California Vehicle Code also outlines the permissible scope of traffic stops, emphasizing that the stop should not be prolonged beyond the time necessary to address the initial infraction, unless independent reasonable suspicion of other criminal activity arises. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to prolong the traffic stop and conduct a search based solely on a hunch or a vague feeling of unease, without any specific, articulable facts to support a belief that criminal activity is afoot. This violates the reasonable suspicion standard required by the Fourth Amendment and California law, potentially rendering any evidence found inadmissible. Another incorrect approach is to ask intrusive questions unrelated to the initial traffic violation or the observed criminal activity, such as inquiring about the driver's personal life or unrelated travel plans, without any justification. This can be construed as an unreasonable detention and an expansion of the stop beyond its lawful scope, again, potentially leading to the suppression of evidence and disciplinary action. A further incorrect approach is to conduct a search of the vehicle or its occupants without probable cause or consent, or without the existence of reasonable suspicion to believe that a weapon is present or that evidence of a crime will be found. This directly contravenes constitutional protection and California's legal standards for searches incident to a traffic stop. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and constitutional rights. This involves 1. Clearly identifying the initial lawful basis for the stop. 2. Continuously assessing whether the stop is being prolonged beyond its necessary scope. 3. Developing specific, articulable facts that rise to the level of reasonable suspicion for any new investigative avenues. 4. Understanding the legal standards for searches and seizures in California and acting only within those parameters. 5. Consulting departmental policy and seeking guidance from supervisors when in doubt. Question 4. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual pattern of access to sensitive citizen data within the Chula Vista Police Department's database. An officer notices a series of log entries indicating access to records that are not directly related to their current case assignments. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for this officer to take? Option A. Delete the suspicious log entries to prevent any potential misinterpretation or further complications. Option B. Discuss the suspicious activity with a trusted colleague to gauge their opinion on the matter before taking any action. Option C. Immediately report the suspicious log entries to their supervisor and the department's Internal Affairs Division for a formal investigation, ensuring all actions are documented. Option D. Ignore the log entries, assuming they are a system glitch or an insignificant anomaly. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the suspicious log entries to their supervisor and the department's Internal Affairs Division for a formal investigation, ensuring all actions are documented. Explanation. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential lapse in regulatory compliance concerning the handling of sensitive information within the Chula Vista Police Department. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires officers to balance the immediate need for information with strict adherence to privacy laws and departmental policies, particularly regarding the unauthorized access and dissemination of data. The potential for misuse of information, even if unintentional, carries significant legal and ethical ramifications. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented review of the system's logs by authorized personnel, adhering strictly to California Penal Code sections related to access and disclosure of criminal offender record information. This process ensures that any unauthorized access is identified, investigated, and addressed according to established protocols, thereby upholding the integrity of the system and protecting individual privacy rights. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the potential violation through a structured, lawful, and accountable process, minimizing the risk of further breaches and ensuring that any necessary disciplinary or corrective actions are taken based on factual evidence gathered through authorized channels. An incorrect approach would be to immediately delete the suspicious log entries without proper investigation. This is a regulatory failure because it obstructs a lawful inquiry into potential violations of privacy laws and departmental policy. It prevents the department from understanding the scope of the breach, identifying the responsible parties, and implementing necessary safeguards. Another incorrect approach is to discuss the suspicious activity informally with colleagues without initiating a formal report. This is an ethical and procedural failure, as it bypasses established reporting mechanisms, potentially leading to a lack of accountability and an inability to track or resolve the issue effectively. Finally, ignoring the alert altogether represents a severe dereliction of duty and a direct violation of the department's responsibility to maintain secure and compliant data systems. This failure to act can lead to ongoing unauthorized access, significant legal penalties, and a breakdown of public trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established policies and legal mandates. This involves recognizing potential compliance issues, initiating appropriate reporting procedures, cooperating fully with investigations, and ensuring all actions taken are documented and justifiable under relevant regulations. Question 5. Benchmark analysis indicates that Chula Vista Police Department officers responding to a call regarding suspicious noises emanating from a residence, where the resident has a history of domestic disturbances, must navigate a complex regulatory environment. Considering the California Penal Code and constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures, what is the most appropriate initial course of action for officers upon arriving at the scene and hearing the noises? Option A. Enter the residence immediately to investigate the source of the noises, given the resident's history of domestic disturbances. Option B. Disregard the noises as a potential false alarm and continue with regular patrol duties. Option C. Secure the perimeter of the residence and immediately contact a supervisor and request legal counsel to assess the situation and determine the next steps. Option D. Conduct a brief visual inspection from the street and then depart if no immediate threats are visible from that vantage point. The correct answer is C. Secure the perimeter of the residence and immediately contact a supervisor and request legal counsel to assess the situation and determine the next steps. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action in a potential public safety situation and the strict adherence to the California Penal Code regarding lawful searches and seizures. Officers must exercise sound judgment to balance immediate concerns with constitutional rights, ensuring their actions are both effective and legally defensible within the Chula Vista Police Department's operational framework. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the scene and requesting a supervisor and legal counsel to assess the situation and determine the appropriate course of action based on established legal precedent and departmental policy. This approach is correct because it prioritizes constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures, as mandated by the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and codified in the California Penal Code. By involving supervisors and legal experts, officers ensure that any subsequent actions, such as a search, are conducted with proper legal authorization, such as a warrant based on probable cause, or fall within a recognized exception to the warrant requirement. This upholds the department's commitment to lawful policing and protects against potential legal challenges and civil rights violations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately entering the residence to investigate the sounds without obtaining a warrant or establishing exigent circumstances. This violates the California Penal Code, specifically sections related to search and seizure, which require probable cause and a warrant for entry into a private residence unless specific, narrowly defined exceptions apply. Sounds alone, without further corroboration of an immediate threat to life or destruction of evidence, may not rise to the level of exigent circumstances. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the sounds and continue patrolling, assuming it is a false alarm. This is professionally unacceptable because it neglects a potential public safety concern and a possible violation of law occurring within the community the department is sworn to protect. It demonstrates a failure to respond appropriately to observable events that could indicate criminal activity or a need for intervention. A third incorrect approach is to conduct a cursory visual inspection from the exterior of the property and then leave without further investigation or consultation. While exterior observation is permissible, it does not fulfill the duty to investigate potential crimes or emergencies when there is reasonable cause to believe they are occurring. This approach fails to adequately address the observed situation and could be seen as dereliction of duty if the sounds indicated a genuine emergency. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with observation and assessment. If an observation suggests potential criminal activity or an emergency, the next step is to gather more information if safely possible without violating rights. If probable cause for a search or arrest is developing, officers should consult with supervisors and legal advisors to ensure all actions are compliant with the California Penal Code and constitutional law. This layered approach ensures that immediate needs are addressed while safeguarding individual liberties and departmental integrity. Question 6. Risk assessment procedures indicate a Chula Vista police officer has lawfully stopped a vehicle for a minor traffic infraction. During the stop, the officer observes furtive movements by the passenger and detects a faint odor that could be consistent with illegal substances. The officer has no prior information about the occupants or the vehicle. What is the most appropriate course of action regarding a search of the vehicle? Option A. Conduct a search of the vehicle based on the observed furtive movements and the odor, articulating these specific observations as the basis for probable cause. Option B. Detain the occupants for an extended period to wait for a K-9 unit, even if no further suspicious activity is observed. Option C. Immediately search the entire vehicle without further investigation, assuming the observations are definitive proof of illegal activity. Option D. Conduct a search of the vehicle based solely on the officer's subjective feeling that something is amiss, without specific articulable facts. The correct answer is A. Conduct a search of the vehicle based on the observed furtive movements and the odor, articulating these specific observations as the basis for probable cause. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between immediate public safety concerns and the procedural rights of an individual. Officers must balance the need to investigate a potential crime with the constitutional protections afforded to citizens, particularly regarding search and seizure. The specific context of a vehicle stop in Chula Vista, California, necessitates adherence to California and federal constitutional law, as well as departmental policies. Careful judgment is required to ensure actions are both effective in law enforcement and legally sound, avoiding violations that could compromise evidence or lead to legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves conducting a thorough, yet lawful search of the vehicle based on probable cause. This approach, which aligns with option A, requires officers to articulate specific, observable facts that would lead a reasonable person to believe contraband or evidence of a crime is present in the vehicle. This is grounded in the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and California's Penal Code, which permit warrantless searches of vehicles if probable cause exists. Departmental policy in Chula Vista would further guide officers on the scope and documentation of such searches. This method prioritizes legal justification for intrusion, ensuring that any evidence obtained is admissible and that the officer's actions are defensible. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves searching the vehicle without any articulable suspicion or probable cause, simply because the officer feels something is wrong. This violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, as well as California's stricter standards for searches. Such a search would be considered unlawful, and any evidence found would likely be suppressed. Another incorrect approach is to detain the driver indefinitely without developing probable cause for a search, or to expand the scope of the stop beyond its initial justification without further reasonable suspicion. This infringes upon the individual's right to freedom from unreasonable detention and can lead to claims of false imprisonment or unlawful restraint. A further incorrect approach is to conduct a search based on a hunch or a generalized suspicion about the driver's demeanor without specific, objective facts. This is not sufficient to establish probable cause and represents a failure to adhere to established legal standards for searches and seizures. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the legal basis for any interaction or intrusion. This involves assessing the totality of the circumstances, focusing on observable facts and articulable reasons. When considering a vehicle search, officers must ask, do I have probable cause to believe evidence of a crime is in this vehicle? If the answer is yes, they must be able to articulate those specific facts. If the answer is no, they must limit their actions to what is legally permissible for the initial stop, e.g., issuing a citation for a traffic violation. Documentation of all observations and actions is crucial for accountability and legal defense. Question 7. Risk assessment procedures indicate that during a lawful arrest in a Chula Vista residence, officers discover a smartphone in plain view on a coffee table. The smartphone is not directly related to the suspected offense for which the arrest is being made, but its presence is noted. Which of the following actions best adheres to the Chula Vista Police Department's policies and California law regarding the seizure of digital devices? Option A. Secure the smartphone as potential evidence and initiate the process to obtain a search warrant for its contents, ensuring proper documentation and chain of custody. Option B. Take the smartphone into personal custody without initiating the warrant process, intending to review it later. Option C. Immediately search the smartphone for any relevant information to expedite the investigation. Option D. Leave the smartphone at the scene, as it is not directly related to the primary offense. Correct answer is A. Secure the smartphone as potential evidence and initiate the process to obtain a search warrant for its contents, ensuring proper documentation and chain of custody. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential violation of privacy rights and departmental policy regarding the handling of sensitive information obtained during an investigation. Officers must balance the need for evidence with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual privacy. Misjudging this balance can lead to legal repercussions, disciplinary action, and damage to public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the digital device and documenting its seizure according to Chula Vista Police Department policy and California Penal Code sections related to search warrants and digital evidence. This approach prioritizes legal compliance by ensuring that any subsequent examination of the device is conducted under proper legal authority, typically a warrant. It respects the individual's privacy rights by preventing unauthorized access to potentially sensitive data. This aligns with the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures and departmental guidelines that mandate lawful procedures for evidence collection. Incorrect approaches analysis. Seizing the device and immediately searching its contents without a warrant or clear exigent circumstances is a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment and California Penal Code. This bypasses the established legal safeguards designed to protect individual privacy and can render any evidence obtained inadmissible in court. Ignoring the device and leaving it at the scene, even if the primary suspect is apprehended, is professionally negligent. This constitutes a failure to secure potentially crucial evidence that could be relevant to the investigation or other criminal activities. It also neglects the department's duty to properly collect and preserve evidence. Taking the device into personal possession without following departmental chain of custody protocols and initiating the warrant process is a serious breach of procedure. This creates a risk of evidence tampering, contamination, or loss, and undermines the integrity of the investigation and the judicial process. It also raises ethical concerns about unauthorized access to personal data. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic approach that prioritizes legal authority and departmental policy. This involves 1. Identifying potential evidence and its significance to the investigation. 2. Assessing whether exigent circumstances justify immediate action or if a warrant is required. 3. Adhering strictly to departmental procedures for evidence seizure, documentation, and chain of custody. 4. Consulting with supervisors or legal counsel when in doubt about the proper course of action. This structured decision-making process ensures that actions are lawful, ethical, and contribute to a sound investigation. Question 8. Risk assessment procedures indicate that during a lawful traffic stop in Chula Vista, California, an officer observes furtive movements by the driver and a strong odor of marijuana emanating from the vehicle. What is the most appropriate sequence of actions for the officer to take regarding questioning and evidence gathering? Option A. Secure the scene. Conduct a pat-down for weapons if reasonable suspicion of danger exists, and question the driver about the observed movements and the odor, and if probable cause develops, request consent to search or obtain a warrant. Option B. Allow the driver to leave without questioning, despite the observed furtive movements and odor, to avoid any potential accusations of unlawful detention. Option C. Detain the driver and conduct a full search of the vehicle without further questioning or consent. Option D. Immediately ask the driver if they have any illegal substances in the vehicle, and if they have been smoking marijuana. The correct answer is A. Secure the scene, conduct a pat-down for weapons if reasonable suspicion of danger exists, then question the driver about the observed movements and the odor, and if probable cause develops, request consent to search or obtain a warrant. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Chula Vista Police Department officers by requiring them to balance the immediate need for information with the constitutional rights of an individual during a roadside stop. The officer must make a rapid assessment of the situation, considering potential threats, the nature of the observed infraction, and the legal boundaries of questioning, all while maintaining public safety and upholding due process. The pressure of a dynamic roadside environment, potential for escalation, and the need for accurate, admissible evidence necessitate careful judgment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a phased approach to questioning that prioritizes officer safety and the legality of the stop before delving into potentially incriminating inquiries. This begins with establishing the reason for the stop and gathering basic identification information. If the initial interaction reveals further reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, the officer can then proceed to more targeted questioning related to that suspicion. Ensuring Miranda warnings are provided if the individual is in custody or their freedom of movement is significantly restricted, and the questioning is designed to elicit an incriminating response. This approach respects the individual's rights while allowing for thorough investigation within legal parameters. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately launching into detailed questions about potential criminal activity without first establishing the lawful basis for the stop or ensuring the individual's basic rights are understood. This could lead to the suppression of any evidence obtained, as it may be deemed the fruit of an unlawful interrogation. Another incorrect approach is to forego any questioning beyond basic identification, even when observations during the stop clearly indicate probable cause for further investigation. This failure to investigate a developing situation could compromise public safety and hinder the effective enforcement of laws. Third incorrect approach is to assume guilt and conduct an aggressive interrogation without adhering to the procedural safeguards required by the Fourth and Fifth Amendments of the U.S. Constitution, particularly regarding custodial interrogation. This not only violates legal standards, but also erodes public trust. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the legal justification for the stop. They must then assess the immediate environment for safety concerns. Questioning should proceed logically, starting with the reason for the stop and escalating to more specific inquiries only as reasonable suspicion or probable cause develops, always mindful of the point at which Miranda warnings become constitutionally mandated. Documentation of observations and interactions is crucial throughout the process. Question 9. Strategic planning requires officers of the Chula Vista Police Department to consider the most legally sound and ethically defensible method for gathering evidence during an active investigation where a suspect is believed to be in possession of contraband within their residence. Option A. Wait indefinitely for the suspect to exit the residence voluntarily, even if evidence might be destroyed. Option B. Conduct a warrantless search immediately upon arrival at the residence, assuming the suspect's presence implies consent. Option C. Request consent to search from the suspect without informing them of their right to refuse. Option D. Obtain a search warrant from a judge based on established probable cause. The correct answer is D. Obtain a search warrant from a judge based on established probable cause. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to respect individual rights and due process. Officers must act decisively while adhering to strict legal boundaries, particularly concerning search and seizure, which are fundamental to maintaining public trust and upholding the Constitution of the United States. The pressure of an ongoing investigation can lead to hasty decisions that could compromise evidence or violate civil liberties. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining a warrant based on probable cause. This approach is correct because it aligns directly with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures. A warrant, issued by a neutral and detached magistrate, ensures that law enforcement has demonstrated sufficient probable cause to believe that evidence of a crime will be found at the location to be searched. This process safeguards individual rights while providing a legally sound basis for investigative actions, thereby ensuring the admissibility of any evidence obtained in court. Incorrect approaches analysis. Delaying the investigation to wait for a warrant, even if probable cause exists, could be an incorrect approach if it allows for the destruction or concealment of critical evidence, thereby jeopardizing the investigation's success and public safety. While warrants are crucial, exigent circumstances can sometimes justify immediate action. Conducting a warrantless search based on a hunch or suspicion, without probable cause or a recognized exception to the warrant requirement, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This violates the Fourth Amendment and could lead to the suppression of evidence, disciplinary action against the officer, and civil liability. Seeking consent to search without informing the individual of their right to refuse consent is also problematic. While consent can be a valid basis for a search, it must be voluntary and informed. Failing to inform someone of their right to refuse can render the consent invalid, making the search unlawful. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves a thorough assessment of the situation to determine if probable cause exists and if any exceptions to the warrant requirement apply. When in doubt, consulting with a supervisor or legal counsel is advisable. The ultimate goal is to gather necessary information to ensure public safety and justice while rigorously upholding constitutional rights. Question 10. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a Chula Vista Police Department officer has developed probable cause to believe that a suspect involved in a complex fraud scheme has been systematically diverting funds through a series of business accounts. The officer has identified specific bank branches and account numbers associated with the suspect's illicit activities. To secure the financial records necessary for the investigation, which of the following actions represents the most legally sound and ethically appropriate course of action under California law? Option A. Conduct a preliminary interview with the bank managers to gauge their willingness to cooperate and provide records based on the officer's verbal request, without formal legal documentation. Option B. Rely on the officer's suspicion and the identified account numbers to subpoena the financial records directly from the banks without judicial oversight. Option C. Prepare and present an affidavit to a magistrate detailing the probable cause and requesting a search warrant for the identified bank accounts and associated financial records. Option D. Seize the financial records from the bank branches immediately based on the officer's belief that probable cause exists, and then seek a search warrant to retroactively legitimize the seizure. The correct answer is C. Prepare and present an affidavit to a magistrate detailing the probable cause and requesting a search warrant for the identified bank accounts and associated financial records. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the officer to balance the immediate need for accurate financial data in a potential criminal investigation with the legal and ethical considerations surrounding the seizure of financial records. The officer must understand the specific legal thresholds and procedures required by California law to lawfully obtain and analyze financial information, ensuring that the investigation remains within the bounds of constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. Failure to adhere to these procedures can lead to the suppression of crucial evidence and compromise the integrity of the investigation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining a search warrant based on probable cause. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and California Penal Code sections governing search warrants, e.g. Penal Code Section 1524. A search warrant ensures that a neutral and detached magistrate has reviewed the evidence and determined that probable cause exists to believe that evidence of a crime will be found at the location to be searched or in the items to be seized. This process provides a legal safeguard against arbitrary governmental intrusion and ensures that the seizure of financial records is conducted in a lawful and constitutionally permissible manner. The warrant specifies the place to be searched and the items to be seized, limiting the scope of the search and preventing overreach. Incorrect approaches analysis. Seizing the financial records without a warrant and intending to seek a warrant later is a significant legal and ethical failure. This action violates the principle of probable cause and the requirement for judicial authorization before a search and seizure can occur. It constitutes an unlawful seizure, as it bypasses the necessary legal process designed to protect individual rights. Furthermore, attempting to justify the seizure after the fact by seeking a warrant retroactively undermines the warrant requirement and could lead to the suppression of any evidence obtained. Relying solely on the officer's suspicion, even if strong, does not meet the legal standard of probable cause required by law for a warrantless seizure of financial records in this context. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and constitutional protections. This involves understanding the specific legal requirements for searches and seizures in California, particularly concerning financial records. When faced with a situation requiring the collection of such evidence, the primary consideration should be whether probable cause exists to support a warrant. If probable cause is established, the next step is to meticulously prepare and present the affidavit to a magistrate to obtain a search warrant. If immediate exigent circumstances exist that would justify a warrantless search, which is highly unlikely for financial records in a typical scenario, those specific, articulable facts must be documented and justified according to established legal exceptions to the warrant requirement. In all other cases, the warrant process is the mandatory and ethically sound procedure. Question 11. The evaluation methodology shows that when responding to a surge in nonviolent public disturbances reported in the downtown Chula Vista business district, officers must consider various deployment strategies. Which of the following represents the most effective and professionally sound approach for the Chula Vista Police Department? Option A. Signing all available patrol units to saturate the downtown business district until the reported disturbances cease, regardless of other calls for service. Option B. Prioritizing patrol assignments based on officer preference for specific beats within the downtown district. Option C. Deploying a dedicated team to patrol the downtown area during peak hours, focusing on de-escalation and community engagement, while simultaneously utilizing data analytics to identify and address underlying causes of disturbances in other affected neighborhoods. Option D. Relying solely on reactive responses to each individual disturbance call in the downtown area, without a broader strategic deployment plan. The correct answer is C. Deploying a dedicated team to patrol the downtown area during peak hours, focusing on de-escalation and community engagement, while simultaneously utilizing data analytics to identify and address underlying causes of disturbances in other affected neighborhoods. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that effective law enforcement requires a nuanced understanding of community engagement and the appropriate use of departmental resources. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the immediate need for visible police presence against the strategic allocation of limited personnel and the potential for community perception of over-policing or under-resourcing in other areas. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing demands, while adhering to Chula Vista Police Department policies and California state law regarding public safety and community relations. The best approach involves a proactive and data-informed deployment strategy that prioritizes areas with identified needs or intelligence, while also maintaining a visible presence in high-traffic community zones. This approach is correct because it aligns with best practices in modern policing, emphasizing efficient resource utilization and community-oriented policing principles. By focusing on intelligence-led policing and community engagement, officers can address specific crime trends or public safety concerns more effectively, fostering trust and collaboration with residents. This aligns with the Chula Vista Police Department's commitment to serving the community through strategic and responsive policing, as outlined in departmental general orders and California Penal Code sections related to public safety and community policing initiatives. An approach that solely focuses on responding to every minor complaint without strategic assessment is incorrect because it can lead to inefficient use of resources, potentially depleting personnel from areas where they are most needed for serious crime prevention or response. This can also create a perception of harassment or oversurveillance in certain neighborhoods, damaging community relations. Furthermore, an approach that neglects to document and analyze deployment patterns fails to provide the data necessary for continuous improvement and strategic planning, which is a fundamental aspect of effective departmental management and accountability under California law. An approach that prioritizes personal preference over departmental directives or community needs is incorrect, as it undermines the chain of command and the professional standards expected of law enforcement officers, potentially leading to inconsistent service delivery and a failure to meet the department's overall mission. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the department's mission and strategic objectives. This involves assessing available intelligence, understanding community needs and concerns, and evaluating resource availability. Decisions should be guided by departmental policy, relevant state laws, and ethical considerations, prioritizing the greatest public good and safety. Regular review and analysis of deployment strategies are crucial for adapting to changing circumstances and ensuring accountability. Question 12. The audit findings indicate that during a recent disturbance call in Chula Vista, California, officers encountered an individual who was verbally disruptive and interfering with the initial steps of securing the scene. The individual was not physically threatening, but was repeatedly shouting and attempting to approach the area where officers were assessing a potential crime scene. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Chula Vista police officers in this situation, considering their duty to maintain order and investigate? Option A. Immediately physically restrain the individual to prevent any further disruption without attempting verbal de-escalation. Option B. Issue loud, aggressive verbal commands and physically push the individual away to create distance. Option C. Issue clear, calm verbal commands to the individual to step back and explain the need for them to remain clear of the immediate scene, while observing their compliance and readiness to use further de-escalation techniques if necessary. Option D. Ignore the individual's behavior and continue with the primary investigation, assuming their disruption will cease on its own. The correct answer is C. Issue clear, calm verbal commands to the individual to step back and explain the need for them to remain clear of the immediate scene, while observing their compliance and readiness to use further de-escalation techniques if necessary. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in adherence to California Penal Code Section 148A.1, which prohibits willfully resisting, delaying, or obstructing a peace officer in the discharge of their duties. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires officers to balance the immediate need to secure a scene and gather evidence with the legal and ethical obligations to treat individuals with respect and to avoid unnecessary escalation. The pressure of a chaotic situation can lead to hasty decisions that may have legal ramifications. The best approach involves de-escalation and clear communication while maintaining officer safety and control of the situation. This means verbally instructing the individual to comply with lawful orders, explaining the reason for the instructions, and offering alternatives if feasible, all while observing the individual's behavior for any signs of immediate threat. This approach is correct because it prioritizes lawful compliance with Penal Code Section 148A.1 by attempting to gain voluntary cooperation before resorting to physical intervention. It aligns with best practices in law enforcement that emphasize de-escalation techniques to minimize the use of force and preserve the integrity of investigations. An incorrect approach would be to immediately use physical force to subdue the individual without attempting verbal commands or de-escalation. This fails to meet the standard of reasonable force and could violate California Penal Code Section 148A. 1. By unnecessarily delaying or obstructing the officer's duties through an unjustified use of force. It also risks civil liability and damage to public trust. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the individual's disruptive behavior and proceed with the investigation as if they were not present. This is professionally unacceptable, as it allows the individual to continue potentially obstructing the investigation, which directly contravenes the officer's duty to maintain order and secure the scene as required by law. It also creates a safety risk for both the officers and the public. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to issue vague or contradictory commands, leading to confusion and further resistance. This demonstrates a failure in clear communication, which is a cornerstone of effective de-escalation and lawful compliance. It can inadvertently escalate the situation and make it more difficult to achieve the objective of securing the scene without unnecessary force. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes situational awareness, clear and concise communication, and the application of de-escalation techniques. This framework involves assessing the immediate threat level, attempting verbal persuasion and lawful orders, and only resorting to physical intervention when absolutely necessary and justified by the individual's actions, always in accordance with California law and departmental policy. Question 13. Quality control measures reveal that a Chula Vista Police Department officer initiated a traffic stop and subsequently searched the vehicle, leading to an arrest. The officer's report, however, lacks specific details regarding the driving infraction or any observable indicators that suggested criminal activity beyond a general feeling of unease. Which of the following approaches best reflects the professional and legal standards expected of the officer in documenting the justification for the stop and search? Option A. The officer relied on a general feeling of unease and a subjective hunch that the occupants might be involved in illicit activities without detailing specific observations. Option B. The officer justified the search based primarily on the driver's nervous demeanor during the initial interaction. Without other supporting evidence. Option C. The officer expanded the duration of the stop and conducted a search based on the initial, minor traffic violation, without developing any new articulable facts suggesting further criminal activity. Option D. The officer meticulously documented all specific, observable facts and behaviors that formed the basis for reasonable suspicion to initiate the stop and probable cause to conduct the search, clearly articulating the connection between these facts and the suspected criminal activity. The correct answer is D. The officer meticulously documented all specific, observable facts and behaviors that formed the basis for reasonable suspicion to initiate the stop and probable cause to conduct the search, clearly articulating the connection between these facts and the suspected criminal activity. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between immediate public safety concerns and the procedural rights of individuals encountered during a traffic stop. Officers must balance the need to investigate potential criminal activity with the requirement to act within the bounds of the law, specifically the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court and enforced by California law. The officer's actions must be justifiable based on reasonable suspicion or probable cause, and any deviation can lead to legal repercussions and damage public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer meticulously documenting all observations and articulable facts that led to the belief that criminal activity was afoot. This includes specific details about the vehicle's driving behavior, any visible contraband or suspicious items, and the demeanor of the occupants. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal standard for initiating a traffic stop and conducting a search under the Fourth Amendment. California law, mirroring federal precedent, requires that any detention or search be based on reasonable suspicion or probable cause. By documenting these specific, objective facts, the officer creates a record that can withstand legal scrutiny, demonstrating that their actions were not arbitrary but based on a legitimate law enforcement purpose. This upholds constitutional rights while allowing for effective policing. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves the officer relying solely on a hunch or a general feeling that something is wrong without concrete, observable facts. This is professionally unacceptable because it violates the Fourth Amendment's requirement for reasonable suspicion. Hunch is subjective and not articulable, making it insufficient legal grounds for a stop or search. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a search based on the occupant's perceived nervousness alone, without any other corroborating evidence. While nervousness can be a factor, it is not, by itself, sufficient to establish reasonable suspicion or probable cause for a search. Over-reliance on subjective indicators like nervousness can lead to discriminatory policing and erodes public trust. A further incorrect approach is to expand the scope of the stop beyond its initial justification without developing new reasonable suspicion or probable cause. For example, if the initial stop was for a minor traffic violation, the officer cannot arbitrarily detain the occupants for an extended period or search the vehicle without further articulable facts suggesting criminal activity. This infringes upon the individual's right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective, articulable facts. When encountering a situation that warrants investigation, officers should ask themselves, what specific, observable behaviors or conditions lead me to believe a crime is occurring or has occurred? This question forces a focus on evidence rather than intuition. They must then consider whether these facts meet the legal threshold for their intended action, e.g., reasonable suspicion for a stop, probable cause for a search. Documentation of these facts is paramount for accountability and legal defense. If the initial justification for a stop or detention is exhausted, officers must reassess the situation based on new, articulable facts before proceeding further. Question 14. The control framework reveals that Chula Vista Police Department officers are expected to manage information flow regarding ongoing investigations with utmost integrity. If a local news outlet inquires about a sensitive, ongoing investigation into alleged financial misconduct within a prominent community organization, what is the most appropriate course of action for an officer to take to ensure compliance with California law and departmental policy? Option A. Immediately provide the news outlet with preliminary findings and details of the investigation, as the public has a right to be informed about potential wrongdoing in the community. Option B. Share the details of the investigation with a trusted colleague within the department to get their opinion on how to best respond to the media inquiry. Option C. Issue a brief, non-committal statement to the press acknowledging that an investigation is underway but offering no specific details to avoid speculation. Option D. Consult with the public information officer and the supervising officer to determine the appropriate level of detail and authorization for any public statement, adhering strictly to departmental guidelines on media relations and information release for ongoing investigations. The correct answer is D. Consult with the public information officer and the supervising officer to determine the appropriate level of detail and authorization for any public statement, adhering strictly to departmental guidelines on media relations and information release for ongoing investigations. Explanation. The control framework reveals the critical importance of maintaining public trust and ensuring accountability within law enforcement. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between departmental policy, the need for transparency, and the privacy rights of individuals involved in a sensitive investigation. Officers are entrusted with significant authority, and their actions must be demonstrably fair, ethical, and compliant with the California Penal Code and Chula Vista Police Department policies. Decision of how to handle the dissemination of information regarding an ongoing investigation requires careful judgment to balance the public's right to know with the integrity of the investigation and the rights of those under scrutiny. The best professional practice involves a measured and policy-driven approach to information release. This means adhering strictly to departmental guidelines and state law regarding the disclosure of information related to ongoing investigations. Specifically, it requires consulting with the Public Information Officer, PO, and the supervising officer to determine what information, if any, can be legally and ethically released without jeopardizing the investigation or violating privacy. This approach ensures that all disclosures are authorized, accurate, and consistent with legal requirements and departmental protocols, thereby upholding the department's commitment to transparency and accountability while protecting the investigative process. Releasing preliminary findings directly to a local news outlet without authorization is professionally unacceptable. This action bypasses established protocols for information dissemination, potentially compromises the investigation by tipping off suspects, and violates departmental policy designed to ensure accurate and controlled communication. It also risks violating privacy rights of individuals not yet charged or convicted. Sharing the information with a trusted colleague for informal discussion before any official release is also professionally unacceptable. While seemingly innocuous, this can lead to unauthorized leaks and the spread of unverified information, undermining the integrity of the investigation and potentially damaging reputations. It represents a failure to follow established channels for information handling. Providing a vague, non-committal statement to the press that acknowledges an investigation is occurring, but offers no specific details, is a plausible but ultimately insufficient approach. While it avoids outright policy violation, it fails to proactively manage public perception or provide necessary, authorized information, potentially leaving room for speculation and misinformation. It lacks the proactive engagement and adherence to policy that the best practice demands. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to policy and law, consultation with appropriate authorities, supervisors, PO, and a commitment to transparency that does not compromise investigative integrity or individual rights. This involves understanding the legal boundaries of information disclosure, the specific departmental policies governing such releases, and the ethical implications of any communication. Question 15. Analysis of a domestic disturbance call in Chula Vista, California, where a child is present and appears distressed, requires a nuanced response. A Chula Vista police officer arrives at the scene and observes signs of a heated argument between the parents, with the child crying in the corner of the living room. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the officer to take to ensure the safety of all parties and initiate a proper investigation? Option A. Secure the scene, separate the adults to de-escalate, assess the child's immediate well-being, and then gather information from all parties while observing the child's condition and environment, preparing to involve child protective services if necessary. Option B. Begin a detailed interrogation of the child about the specifics of the argument before speaking to the parents or assessing the overall scene. Option C. Immediately detain the individual who appears to be shouting the loudest, without further investigation into the child's condition or the full context of the argument. Option D. Advise the parents to calm down and leave the scene, assuming the situation will resolve itself without further intervention. The correct answer is A. Secure the scene, separate the adults to de-escalate, assess the child's immediate well-being, and then gather information from all parties while observing the child's condition and environment, preparing to involve child protective services if necessary. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Chula Vista police officer due to the sensitive nature of a domestic disturbance call involving potential child endangerment. The officer must balance the immediate need to ensure the safety of all individuals, particularly the child, with the legal requirements for evidence collection and the rights of the involved parties. The presence of a minor in a volatile situation necessitates a heightened level of caution and adherence to specific protocols to avoid compromising the investigation or causing further harm. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene and ensuring the immediate safety of the child and other occupants. This includes separating the involved adults to de-escalate the situation and conducting a preliminary assessment of the child's well-being. The officer should then, in accordance with California Penal Code and Chula Vista Police Department policy, attempt to gather information from all parties, including the reporting party and the individuals involved in the dispute, while also observing the child's condition and environment. If there is probable cause to believe a crime has occurred and the child is in danger, the officer must follow established procedures for child protective services notification and potential removal, documenting all observations and actions meticulously. This approach prioritizes the child's safety, adheres to legal mandates for intervention in domestic violence and child endangerment cases, and lays the groundwork for a thorough investigation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately focus solely on arresting one of the adults without a comprehensive assessment of the child's safety or gathering sufficient information from all parties. This could lead to an incomplete understanding of the situation, potentially overlooking the primary aggressor or failing to address the child's immediate needs. It also risks violating due process if probable cause is not firmly established. Another incorrect approach would be to leave the scene without taking any protective action for the child, assuming the situation will resolve itself or that the reporting party will handle it. This is a critical failure to uphold the duty to protect a minor when there is reasonable suspicion of endangerment, violating California's child abuse reporting laws and departmental policy. A third incorrect approach would be to interrogate the child extensively without the presence of a parent or guardian, unless legally permissible due to specific circumstances of abuse or a trained child forensic interviewer. This can be traumatizing for the child, potentially taint their testimony, and may not be admissible evidence, while also violating established protocols for interviewing minors in sensitive situations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with immediate threat assessment and safety prioritization. This is followed by information gathering from all available sources, adhering to legal statutes and departmental policies. Documentation of all observations, actions, and decisions is paramount. In situations involving potential child endangerment, the involvement of child protective services and adherence to specific protocols for interviewing and protecting minors are critical. The officer must remain objective, gather facts, and act within the bounds of the law and ethical guidelines to ensure the safety and well-being of all involved, especially vulnerable individuals. Question 16. The review process indicates that during a routine patrol in Chula Vista, California, an officer observes an individual exhibiting agitated behavior and speaking loudly to themselves near a public park entrance. The individual is not posing an immediate threat to anyone, but appears distressed. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the officer, adhering to California law and best practices for law enforcement? Option A. Initiate a high-visibility approach with flashing lights and sirens to gain the individual's attention and assert authority. Option B. Observe the individual from a distance and wait for them to calm down on their own before taking any action. Option C. Approach the individual cautiously. Attempt to engage them verbally in a calm and non-confrontational manner to assess their well-being and the situation, and explore de-escalation strategies. Option D. Immediately attempt to physically detain the individual to prevent any potential disturbance or escalation of their agitated state. The correct answer is C. Approach the individual cautiously, attempt to engage them verbally in a calm and non-confrontational manner to assess their well-being and the situation, and explore de-escalation strategies. Explanation. The review process indicates a scenario where a Chula Vista Police Department officer encounters a situation requiring a nuanced understanding of California Penal Code and departmental policy regarding the use of force and de-escalation. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to ensure public safety and officer safety with the legal and ethical obligations to use force only when necessary and to explore de-escalation options. Misjudgments can lead to excessive force claims, civil liability, and damage to community trust. The best professional practice involves prioritizing de-escalation techniques and only resorting to physical force when all other reasonable options have been exhausted and the threat level necessitates it. This approach aligns with California Penal Code Section 835A, which mandates that officers use only the force that is reasonable and necessary to effect an arrest, prevent escape, or overcome resistance. It also reflects departmental policies that emphasize de-escalation as a primary strategy. By attempting to verbally calm the individual and assess the situation further, the officer upholds the principle of proportionality in force. An incorrect approach would be to immediately escalate to physical restraint without attempting verbal de-escalation. This fails to meet the legal standard of using only reasonable and necessary force, as less intrusive means were not explored. Another incorrect approach would be to withdraw from the situation entirely without attempting any form of intervention or assessment, which could compromise public safety. Finally, using excessive force beyond what is necessary to control the situation, even after initial de-escalation attempts, would also be a violation of legal and ethical standards. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough assessment of the threat, followed by an evaluation of available de-escalation options. If de-escalation is unsuccessful or not feasible due to an immediate threat, officers must then determine the minimum level of force required to resolve the situation safely and legally, constantly reassessing as the situation evolves. Question 17. Performance analysis shows that Chula Vista Police Department officers responding to domestic disturbance calls in Chula Vista, California, frequently encounter situations where initial dispatch information regarding the history of violence or the presence of weapons is incomplete. Considering the paramount importance of officer safety and effective de-escalation, which of the following approaches best addresses this recurring challenge? Option A. Focus primarily on documenting the events and actions taken after the situation has been stabilized, without expending significant effort on pre-entry intelligence gathering. Option B. Rely exclusively on the initial report provided by the caller, assuming their account is accurate and complete, and proceed with the response based solely on that information. Option C. Immediately enter the residence upon arrival to assess the situation firsthand, assuming that any delay in entry could allow for further escalation or destruction of evidence. Option D. Actively solicit and meticulously document detailed information regarding any history of domestic violence, known weapons, and the emotional state of all individuals involved from dispatch, and upon arrival, from reliable sources such as neighbors, before making entry or engaging directly with the parties. The correct answer is D. Actively solicit and meticulously document detailed information regarding any history of domestic violence, known weapons, and the emotional state of all individuals involved from dispatch, and upon arrival, from reliable sources such as neighbors, before making entry or engaging directly with the parties. Explanation. Performance analysis shows a recurring issue with officers responding to domestic disturbance calls in Chula Vista, California, where initial reports often lack sufficient detail regarding the history of violence or the presence of weapons. This gap in information can lead to officers entering potentially volatile situations with incomplete situational awareness, increasing the risk to both the officers and the individuals involved. The challenge lies in balancing the need for immediate response with the necessity of gathering critical intelligence to ensure officer safety and effective de-escalation. Careful judgment is required to prioritize information gathering without unduly delaying necessary intervention. The best professional practice involves a systematic approach to information gathering during the initial dispatch and upon arrival at the scene. This includes actively seeking and documenting details about prior incidents, known weapons, and the emotional state of all parties involved. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Chula Vista Police Department's Standard Operating Procedures, SOP, regarding officer safety and response to violent calls, emphasizing proactive intelligence gathering to mitigate risk. Ethically, it upholds the duty to protect both the public and officers by ensuring informed decision-making, an approach that prioritizes immediate entry without attempting to gather further information from dispatch or neighbors is professionally unacceptable. It fails to adhere to SOPs that mandate risk assessment and intelligence gathering, potentially leading to an unsafe engagement. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for officer safety and the potential for escalation, which could result in harm. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to rely solely on the initial, potentially biased, report from the caller without seeking corroboration or additional details. This neglects the critical step of verifying information and understanding the full context of the situation, which is a failure in due diligence and could lead to misjudgments. Finally, an approach that focuses on documenting the incident after it has been resolved without actively seeking to understand the contributing factors or potential ongoing risks is insufficient. While documentation is crucial, it should be informed by a proactive assessment of the situation, not merely a passive recording of events. This approach fails to contribute to proactive problem-solving and risk mitigation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough risk assessment based on all available information. This includes prioritizing intelligence gathering, utilizing communication channels effectively, and maintaining situational awareness throughout the response. The framework should emphasize a balanced approach between rapid intervention and informed decision-making, always with officer and public safety as the paramount concern. Question 18. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a citizen complaint regarding excessive force during a recent arrest in Chula Vista, California. Which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and professionally responsible initial response by a Chula Vista Police Department supervisor? Option A. Dismiss the complaint as unlikely given the officer's prior record and the perceived minor nature of the incident. Option B. Immediately initiate a formal internal investigation, ensuring all evidence is secured and witness statements are collected according to departmental policy and California law. Option C. Rely on the arresting officer's verbal report to assess the situation and determine if an investigation is warranted. Option D. Advise the arresting officer to document their version of events and wait to see if a formal complaint is filed before taking further action. The correct answer is B. Immediately initiate a formal internal investigation, ensuring all evidence is secured and witness statements are collected according to departmental policy and California law. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a citizen complaint regarding excessive force during a recent arrest in Chula Vista, California. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires officers to balance the need for effective law enforcement with the constitutional rights of individuals and departmental policy. A hasty or defensive reaction could escalate the situation or lead to an unfounded complaint being mishandled, while a dismissive attitude could erode public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure a thorough, objective, and fair review process. The best professional practice involves initiating a formal internal investigation immediately upon notification of a potential excessive force complaint. This approach ensures that all relevant evidence is preserved, witness statements are collected while memories are fresh, and the incident is reviewed by trained investigators according to Chula Vista Police Department policy and California law. This proactive and systematic approach demonstrates a commitment to accountability and due process for both the complainant and the officer involved, aligning with the department's duty to uphold public safety and constitutional standards. Failing to initiate a formal investigation promptly is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It can lead to the loss of critical evidence, making a fair and accurate assessment impossible. It also signals a lack of seriousness regarding citizen complaints, potentially violating departmental policies on complaint handling and undermining public confidence in the department's commitment to accountability. Furthermore, delaying or ignoring such complaints can expose the department to legal challenges and disciplinary action. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the arresting officer's verbal report without independent verification or documentation. This bypasses established investigative procedures and fails to gather objective evidence. It creates a situation where the officer's account is the only one considered, potentially overlooking crucial details or alternative perspectives, which is a violation of procedural fairness and departmental policy requiring thorough investigation. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss the complaint outright based on the perceived credibility of the officer or the perceived minor nature of the incident. This is an ethical failure as it presumes guilt or innocence without due process and disregards the complainant's right to have their concerns addressed. It also fails to comply with Chula Vista Police Department policy, which mandates a formal review process for all excessive force allegations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to departmental policy and legal mandates. This involves recognizing the gravity of an excessive force allegation, initiating the appropriate investigative protocols without delay, ensuring impartiality throughout the process, and documenting all actions and findings meticulously. This systematic approach ensures fairness, accountability, and maintains public trust. Question 19. Investigation of a reported domestic disturbance at a Chula Vista residence reveals two individuals, a male and a female, who are visibly agitated. The female states the male has been verbally abusive and has threatened to damage her property. The male claims the female is overreacting and that no threats were made. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the Chula Vista Police Department officers on scene? Option A. Advise both parties to calm down and leave the scene, as verbal disputes do not typically warrant police intervention. Option B. Focus questioning primarily on the male, as he is the one being accused of making threats. Option C. Immediately take the male into custody based on the female's statement of threats, as domestic disturbance calls require immediate action. Option D. Separate the individuals and conduct individual interviews. Observe the environment for any signs of disturbance or damage, and listen to each party's account of the events. Correct answer is D. Separate the individuals and conduct individual interviews. Observe the environment for any signs of disturbance or damage, and listen to each party's account of the events. Explanation. Investigation of a potential domestic disturbance in Chula Vista, California, presents a professionally challenging scenario due to the inherent volatility, potential for escalation, and the critical need to balance individual rights with public safety. Officers must make rapid, on-scene judgments with incomplete information, often under stressful conditions. The primary challenge lies in de-escalating the situation, gathering accurate information from potentially unreliable sources, and determining the appropriate course of action while adhering to legal mandates and departmental policy. The best professional practice in this scenario involves a systematic approach to information gathering and assessment, prioritizing officer safety and the safety of all involved parties. This includes conducting separate interviews with all parties present, observing the environment for signs of struggle or danger, and listening actively to understand each individual's perspective. This approach is correct because it aligns with established investigative principles and departmental guidelines for domestic disturbance calls, which emphasize thoroughness, impartiality, and the collection of objective evidence. California law, specifically the Domestic Violence Restraining Order System and Penal Code sections related to domestic violence, mandates that officers investigate thoroughly and make arrests when probable cause exists, but also emphasizes the importance of gathering all relevant facts before making a determination. Ethical considerations also demand a fair and unbiased assessment of the situation. An approach that involves immediately taking sides based on the initial caller's statement is professionally unacceptable. This fails to uphold the principle of impartiality, potentially leading to an unjust outcome and violating the rights of the individual who was not initially believed. It also bypasses the crucial step of gathering corroborating evidence or alternative perspectives, which is a fundamental requirement of any investigation. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the situation as a minor argument without conducting a proper investigation. This demonstrates a failure to recognize the potential for domestic violence, which can escalate rapidly. It neglects the department's duty to respond to all calls for service with appropriate diligence and could leave victims in a dangerous situation, violating both legal obligations and ethical responsibilities to protect vulnerable individuals. Furthermore, an approach that focuses solely on the loudest or most aggressive party, without considering the full context, is flawed. This can lead to misinterpretations of the situation and potentially result in an unwarranted arrest or failure to intervene when necessary. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a structured process. First, ensure scene safety. Second, separate parties to obtain individual accounts. Third, observe and document physical evidence. Fourth, assess for signs of fear or control. Fifth, consult with dispatch and supervisors as needed. And finally, make a determination based on all gathered facts and applicable law. Question 20. Comparative studies suggest that the efficient allocation of patrol units in Chula Vista, California, is critical for maintaining public safety. If the Chula Vista Police Department Dispatch Center receives two simultaneous calls, Call A, a reported noise complaint in the northern sector, and Call B, a confirmed residential burglary in progress in the southern sector, and there are 3 patrol units available. Unit 1, 1 mile from Call A, 5 miles from Call B. Unit 2, 3 miles from Call A, 2 miles from Call B. And Unit 3, 4 miles from Call A, 1 mile from Call B. Assuming standard response priority matrices where a burglary in progress is a higher priority than a noise complaint, and response time is a key metric, what is the most efficient and appropriate dispatch strategy to minimize overall risk and ensure timely response to the more serious incident? Option A. Dispatch Unit 3 to Call B, burglary in progress, and Unit 1 to Call A, noise complaint. Option B. Dispatch Unit 2 to Call B, burglary in progress, and Unit 1 to Call A, noise complaint. Option C. Dispatch Unit 1 to Call B, burglary in progress, and Unit 3 to Call A, noise complaint. Option D. Dispatch Unit 2 to call A noise complaint, and Unit 3 to call B burglary in progress. The correct answer is A. Dispatch Unit 3 to call B burglary in progress, and Unit 1 to call A noise complaint. Explanation. Comparative studies suggest that effective law enforcement requires a nuanced understanding of resource allocation and operational efficiency, particularly when responding to calls for service. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it demands a rapid assessment of competing priorities and the judicious deployment of limited personnel to maximize public safety and minimize response times. The Chula Vista Police Department, like any municipal agency, operates under budgetary constraints and must adhere to established protocols for dispatch and patrol unit assignment. The best approach involves a systematic evaluation of call severity, officer availability, and geographical proximity to ensure the most critical incidents receive immediate attention while maintaining overall patrol coverage. This method prioritizes officer safety and public welfare by dispatching the closest available unit equipped to handle the specific nature of the call. This aligns with the Chula Vista Police Department's operational guidelines, which emphasize efficient dispatching based on real-time data and established response priority matrices. The ethical imperative is to serve the community effectively and equitably, ensuring that all calls are addressed with appropriate urgency. An incorrect approach would be to dispatch the first available unit regardless of its location or suitability for the call type. This could lead to significant delays in responding to more serious incidents occurring elsewhere in the city, potentially compromising public safety and violating departmental protocols for prioritizing calls. Another incorrect approach is to hold a unit for a potentially higher priority call that has not yet been confirmed, thereby delaying response to a confirmed, albeit lower priority, incident and potentially leaving other areas of the city less patrolled. Finally, dispatching a unit based solely on officer preference or convenience, without considering the objective criteria of call severity and proximity, is a direct contravention of professional standards and departmental policy, leading to inefficient resource utilization and potentially jeopardizing community safety. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the dispatch system's parameters, including call priority levels and unit status. This is followed by an objective assessment of incoming information, cross-referencing it with available resources and geographical data. The final step involves making a swift, informed decision that balances immediate needs with long-term operational efficiency, always adhering to departmental policy and ethical obligations.